Hey guys, it's Miracle Monday, and we're going to learn about the third part of our story of Joseph. Remember, the story of Joseph is true. It's from the book of Genesis, which is the first book in our Bible. Even though this happened long ago, we can trust that it is true, and we can learn lessons about God from Joseph's experiences and his story. When we left off in our story last time, Joseph had been falsely accused of trying to kiss and hug Potiphar's wife. Potiphar's wife told a big lie. It wasn't true. Do you remember what Joseph said? He said, "How could I sin against God?" He did the right thing, but he was punished anyway. He was thrown into prison after Potiphar's wife told her husband that big lie. Well, because the Lord was with Joseph, the warden, that's the boss of the prison, put him in charge of everyone who was also in prison. Remember how even though Joseph was a slave, even though he was a slave to Potiphar, Potiphar put him in charge of his whole house? Well, the same thing happened in the jail. So something must have been very special about Joseph. He must have been very, very smart, and people must have realized that the Lord was with him. Even though he was in charge of all the other prisoners, he was still a prisoner himself. Now, sometime later, Pharaoh, that's the ruler of all of Egypt, got mad at his cupbearer, that's the person who brought him his wine every day, and his baker, and sent them to prison too. They both ended up under the care of Joseph. And one day, both the cupbearer and the baker had a dream, and they became deeply troubled by their dream. Seeing their concern, Joseph explained to them what their dreams meant. Do you remember that Joseph had some pretty important dreams when he still lived with his family? Well, when Joseph explained the cupbearer's dream to him, he was happy because his dream was good. But the baker's dream was a message of death, and he was not happy. And that's where our story really picks up today. 2 years after this takes place, okay? So 2 years after Joseph explained the dreams to Pharaoh's cupbearer and his baker, this is where we're picking it up, okay? I'm going to read it directly out of the Bible, out of the book of Genesis. And I'm going to go ahead and tell you, it gets a little weird, but stick with me because we're going to figure out what it all means together. So this is from Genesis 41, 1 through 39. All right, here we go. 2 years later, the king had a dream. That's Pharaoh. He dreamed he was standing on the bank of the Nile River. He saw 7 fat and beautiful cows come up out of the river. They stood there eating grass. Then 7 more cows came up out of the river, but they were thin and ugly. They stood beside the 7 beautiful cows on the bank of the Nile. The 7 skinny and ugly cows ate the 7 beautiful fat cows. Then the king woke up. The king slept again and dreamed a second time. In his dream, he saw 7 full and good heads of grain growing on one stalk. After that, 7 more heads of grain sprang up, but they were thin and burned by the hot east wind. The thin heads of grain ate the 7 full and good heads. Then the king woke up again, and he realized it was only a dream. The next morning, the king was troubled about these dreams, so he sent for all the magicians and wise men of Egypt. The king told them his dreams, but no one could explain their meaning to him. Then the chief officer who served wine to the king said to him, "I remember something I promised to do, but I have forgotten about it. There was a time when you were angry with me and the baker." See, this is the cupbearer. "You put us in prison in the house of the captain of the guard. In prison, we each had a dream in the same night, and each dream had a different meaning. A young Hebrew man," that's Joseph, "was in the prison with us. He was a servant of the captain of the guard. We told him our dreams, and he explained their meaning to us. He told each man the meaning of his dream. Things happened exactly as he said they would. I was given back my old position as cupbearer, and the baker was hanged." Ooh. So the king called for Joseph. The guards quickly brought him out of the prison. He shaved, put on clean clothes, and went before the king. If you were going to meet the king, I think you would get cleaned up too, wouldn't you? The king said to Joseph, I have had a dream, but no one can explain its meaning to me. I have heard that you can explain a dream when someone tells it to you. Joseph answered the king, I am not able to explain the meaning of dreams. God will do this for the king. Then the king said to Joseph, in my dream, I was standing on the bank of the Nile River. I saw 7 fat and beautiful cows. They came up out of the river and ate the grass. Then I saw 7 more cows come out of the river. They were thin and lean and ugly. They were the worst looking cows I have seen in all the land of Egypt. And these thin and ugly cows ate the first 7 fat cows. But after they had eaten the 7 cows, no one could tell they had eaten them. They looked just as thin and ugly as they did in the beginning. Then I woke up. I had another dream. I saw 7 full and good heads of grain growing on one stalk. Then 7 more heads of grain sprang up after them. But these heads were thin and ugly. They were burned by the hot east wind. Then the thin heads ate the 7 good heads. I told this dream to the magicians, but no one could explain its meaning to me. Then Joseph said to the king, both of these dreams mean the same thing. God is telling you what he is about to do. The 7 good cows stand for 7 years, and the 7 good heads of grain stand for 7 years. Both dreams mean the same thing. The 7 thin and ugly cows stand for 7 years, and the 7 thin heads of grain burned by the hot east wind stand for 7 years of hunger. This will happen as I told you. God is showing the king what he is about to do. You will have 7 years of good crops and plenty to eat in all the land of Egypt. But after those 7 years, there will come 7 years of hunger. All the food that grew in the land of Egypt will be forgotten. The time of hunger will eat up the land. People will forget what it was like to have plenty of food. This is because the hunger that follows will be so great. You had 2 dreams, which mean the same thing. This shows that God has firmly decided that this will happen, and he will make it happen soon. So let the king choose a man who is very wise and understanding. Let the king set him over the land of Egypt, and let the king also appoint officers over the land. They should take 1/5 of all the food that is grown during the 7 good years. They should gather all the food that is produced during the good years that are coming. Under the king's authority, they should store the grain in the cities and guard it. That food should be saved for later. It will be used during the 7 years of hunger that will come on the land of Egypt. Then the people in Egypt will not die during the 7 years of hunger. This seemed like a very good idea to the king. All his officers agreed, and the king asked them, "Can we find a better man than Joseph to take the job? God's spirit is truly in him." So the king said to Joseph, "God has shown you all this. There is no one as wise or as understanding as you are." So Pharaoh, the ruler over all of Egypt, had 2 dreams, right? He had one about 7 fat cows and 7 skinny cows, and another one about 7 healthy heads of grain and 7 scorched skinny heads of grain. Those were some pretty weird dreams, if you ask me, and Pharaoh thought that they were pretty weird too. But he was smart enough to know that he shouldn't ignore them. He knew they meant something. First, he asked the wise men and the magicians, which we know that there's no such thing as actual magicians, right? So he asked them, and they didn't know what to do. But when he asked Joseph, what did Joseph say? Did Joseph say, "Oh, yes, I am the best interpreter of dreams"? No, he said it wasn't actually him that was interpreting the dream. It was the Lord. So as soon as he was asked about it, he gave credit to God, because that's where his ability came from. And when he wanted Pharaoh to know that, because this was his opportunity to share God with the Pharaoh. When people give us compliments, it's important that we give God credit too. God gave Joseph the ability to tell Pharaoh what his dream meant. And it meant that there would be 7 years of good crops. That means plenty of food growing out of the ground, plenty of rain for that food to grow. But Then there was going to be 7 years with no rain and no food growing, and people would be very hungry. Well, after Pharaoh understood the meaning of his dreams, he put Joseph in charge of his palace to oversee the collection of food during the 7 good years, so that there would be enough for everybody to eat during the 7 bad years. God gave Joseph the ability to interpret, that means to tell the meaning of dreams, and this made Pharaoh put him in charge. And Joseph saved the people of Egypt from starving during the famine. Now, I can't tell the meaning of dreams, and I bet you can't either. But when we follow Jesus, he does give us abilities that allow us to carry out his purpose. You might be good at taking care of others. You might be a good teacher. You might be good at being in charge of lots of people, or you might be a really hard worker. We're all good at different things, and we can use those things, those talents, those skills, those abilities to bring glory to God and to share his love with others. We've learned a lot about the life of Joseph, but the story is not over yet. Check back next week for the last part of our true story of Joseph, and we'll see again how God takes bad situations and works them out for his good and for your good and for my good too. I'll see you next time.